So, hello everyone. My name is Erica Britton, and I am one of the assistant directors for Pine Reads Review. And today I am joined by the lovely debut author, Serena Kaylor. Serena's first book, Long Story Short, debuted this summer from Wednesday Books, and she has graciously taken time to chat with me about her very first story. There's the lovely book, beautiful cover, by the way. Serena, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited.
For our viewers and listeners, can you share a bit about the book, like maybe like a brief summary?
Sure. So my protagonist, her name is Beatrice Quinn. She's this 16-year-old, socially awkward, neurodivergent, homeschooled math genius who's lived a pretty sheltered life and gets into Oxford University. And her parents are a little bit concerned about her going so far away without really having any support and, not really sure how she would do out there on her own. So they sent her to Shakespearean theater camp to see if and give her a list of teenager tasks that they think would help her sort of catch up on some of the time that she's missed. And she meets a lot of eclectic theater kids, makes a lot of friends along the way, and there might even be a hot British boy that she encounters on her journey.
Maybe there might be. Okay, thank you for the summary. So we will definitely get into the book, but also for anyone who follows you on social media will know that you are a Taylor Swift fan. And as a fellow Swiftie, we have some we're living in some exciting times. So I just want to know what top 3 songs for Midnights are you playing on repeat?
Probably Bejeweled. I really like that one a lot. Mastermind and Antihero, probably.
Okay, solid, solid. I also love those 3. Okay, so my next question is, if you could assign a Taylor Swift song to Bee's character, what song do you feel like encapsulates who she is?
Probably This Is Me Trying.
Yeah. So true. Bee is trying, and you appreciate that.
That's her best.
Yeah. Thank you for indulging me. Taylor Swift's been on my mind recently. So now let's talk about the book. So I just want to share that reading this book felt so nostalgic, but also fun and refreshing for a lot of contemporary YA, summer vibes, but also, like you said, got the summer camp trope, the enemies to lovers, spoilers. And there's also a lot of mental health discussion and representation with things like therapy and having open communication, with like parents and your support system, which I really appreciated. So while you were writing this book, did you always know how the story was going to go, or did anything surprise you during the writing process?
This is the first book that I've ever written, and I didn't really know a whole lot when I started about how to write a book. So a lot of it was me just sitting down and making things up and discovering where I was going as I was doing it. So I had to rewrite it 5 times to get to the point where there was a plot and character arcs that made sense. But the core of her story was very, I think, similar from the beginning, especially from a mental health representation. I'm neurodivergent as well. I have issues with anxiety, and B is kind of, at least some parts of her, the way I would have, or the support I would have liked if I was her age to have had, those coping mechanisms that she displays several times in the book. So I definitely wanted to at least shine a little bit of a light on that.
Yeah, and I think that it comes across really well. And I don't think my level of anxiety, is on the same as, or same level, excuse me, as B's, but it definitely felt very validating. Oh, hearing a character's internal dialogue in social situations and just being like, was this the right thing to say? Am I being too much of this or not enough of this, and especially navigating social settings in a theater camp, of all places. So maybe talk a little bit more about that. You shared that you also have your own anxiety and you wanted to write a character who kind of could reflect that. Was there anything that when you were writing Bee's character, did you find it really easy to write about a character with severe anxiety, or was it just a little personal and a little difficult to get in there?
It was probably a little easy. she responds, I think, a little differently than I do in some ways, but my goodness, so many times, especially when I was her age, and still kind of learning how to navigate a lot of situations like that, where you say something and then you walk away and you're like, oh my God, did I say the right thing? Or I don't think that's what they were asking me, and I think I made it 10 times worse and things like that. So that was probably a little easy to write. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it was very relatable. So again, kind of with that, like you shared that you gave B the kind of support and, like coping mechanisms and tactics that maybe, would have been nice to have when you were her age. So something that is significant, but not the main focus of the book, is that B has a therapist. And there are multiple scenes where she's on the phone with her therapist. She talks about going to therapy with her parents and her friends and things. So seeing a character who goes to therapy and like actively is in therapy, I feel like is pretty new for YA. When you were writing again, like was that a conscious decision? Like, yes, I want B to have a therapist, or was it just kind of like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Teenagers have therapists, and this is just really natural.
It was a conscious decision. My parents put me in therapy when I was, I think I was like 13 or 14, but we lived in a very small town and the therapist was probably not the best. We would sort of talk a little bit and then my mom would come in and she would, I guess, tell my mom everything we talked about. And then we would go home and I did not go for very long. And I was like, this does not seem to be doing anything. But the therapist in my book is based off my actual therapist now, not the name, but basically the entire character. And I think having somebody like that probably back then would have been super helpful and it's very helpful now. So I definitely wanted to show something like that.
Yeah. I feel like a broken record saying like it was great to see. And I'm really happy to have that kind of representation. So, we don't love poor therapy experiences, but we love the representation. Another thing that I just kind of wanted to touch on that you brought up is the fact that, you shared online and in interviews and social media about being a neurodivergent author. But can you share how, this is your first time writing a book. So can you share about your writing process and any advice that you have for protecting your mental health, and for figuring out a way that works best for you and for how your brain works?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm ASD and severe ADD. My sitting down to quietly write and have my thoughts all set out and organized is kind of goes against my entire brain makeup. So I'm on medication and my therapist helps me a lot with like mechanisms to, I guess, try and offset energy and, strategies for optimizing the time when I am working. But basically I have to be on a schedule in order to sit down and write every single day. And I've realized what times work best for me, typically in the morning before I get up, before I go on the internet and kind of see what's happening in the world. And then I start like thinking about like all of that. I just have to like wake up, go to my office where it's quiet and just write. And then I'm done. And then I can like spiral into like my million different little avenues of thoughts. So that is kind of a very laborious type process that I've found that works best over the past few years. And then for protecting mental health, oh my God, never read the reviews or comments. Like every now and then, like, very kind readers will like reach out to me and I'll see something. And I always love it, but I definitely can't read reviews because then I start second guessing myself with trying to write new stuff or people will tag me and stuff. And I mean, autism is a spectrum and they'll feel that their version or their lived experiences are different than mine. So representation isn't accurate. So I just can't look at any of that stuff because it's like, it's a lot to keep writing these characters forward and being true to the sort of characters and stories I want to put out in the world. So I just ignore it and keep going.
Yeah, it's good to have those boundaries. Okay, so to shift gears a bit, kind of circling back to the book and, things like that. So I want to talk about the theater camp setting. What was the appeal for you of sending B off to a summer camp versus doing like community theater or having her be involved with the school play?
Sure. So she wanted to go away for school, like a place where she'd like be by herself and would probably maybe have a roommate. That's my cat. um, or and would have to be in charge of like, feeding herself and making connections and sort of doing all the things that she has to do without, her parents readily available. So the idea of sending her away somewhere where she would experience a lot of those things as kind of a stepping stone seemed like it would be more of a stepping stone to getting to go away for college. Yeah.
Makes sense. And then with that, in addition, not only is B getting sent off to summer camp, but she also has her list of, teenage to do things. So what was your criteria for choosing what, these tasks for B? Because as I was reading them, I was like, oh, this is great. Some very stereotypical high school experiences, but also things that like, yeah, that'd be a little scary to do. I'd be a little intimidated. For you, when you were writing, like what was the criteria for choosing those things?
So I think you're like totally right. Like in the beginning, I wanted the ones from her parents to be like a little stereotypic, like, typical like things that, parents would think like would be teenage activities for their teenage daughter. Her parents definitely have good intentions, maybe not always the best in execution. So just kind of things that they made up on a whim that they think would make her more quote unquote normal. And then the ones from Nolan and Mia at the camp, those are probably ones that I was thinking when I was a teenager that my friends would be like, oh, this is something you should check off. Sorry, my cat's really obsessed with you.
Thank you. I'm so
Come on,
flattered. I
baby.
know my cat also just walked out and I'm just waiting for him to come over. But yeah, so just to come back to the question, yeah, I definitely enjoyed the different tasks that her friends put up. And I agree, I think my friends in high school would also have that same kind of meddling spirit. So that transitions well into my next question. Is that something I really enjoyed about the book and what made it feel so nostalgic and it felt like my, high school theater friends is the ensemble cast of characters. So I want to know, was there a side character that you particularly enjoyed writing and or was there a character who was maybe difficult to write?
Nolan, I think, was probably the easiest character to write out of all of them. He was just so much fun. And some of his chaotic energy kind of is a little bit of like me as an adult. So that was, I think, a little easy to write. Shelby was probably the hardest just because her motivations and behaviors are probably the most unlike mine. And I was trying to, walk a line where she was salvageable. So that was probably the most difficult side character to write. And she definitely changed a lot over the different versions of the book. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, bringing up like specific terminology like motivations is just giving me flashbacks to like every theater class I've been in, like character work and all of that. So I was wondering if you've, ever thought about this with your experiences, having done theater and acting and things, how does creating a character's backstory for an acting role compare to creating a character for writing a book?
Um, they're probably somewhat similar processes. I mean, I I don't think when I was acting, I probably got into it as deeply as I am when I'm writing. When I'm starting to plan out a new book and before I start drafting or anything, I just write like pages of things of these characters and just anything I can think of that just sort of like, you know, fleshes out sort of, things that could speak to their motivations or their backstories later on, like anything from like weird little habits or details about them. And I just write. And then by the time I'm done brainstorming for probably like a week or so, when I start drafting, it's pretty easy because I'm like, oh, I know what they would do in this situation.
When I was reading, talking to a friend who also loosely involved in theater and also a big book reader, we had a whole conversation about like, wow, motivations and like building characters and all of that. So yeah, reading your book was just really fun. So another thing I wanted to talk about, spoilers for our listeners and viewers. I won't spoil too much, we will spoil a little bit, but the play that B is in at the camp is Romeo and Juliet. And B gets cast in sort of the universal understudy role. And I don't know about other readers, but I was definitely expecting B to have to, last minute step in, play Juliet, because Nick, the hot British boy, theater prodigy, resident Romeo, that's gotta, come around sometime. But that isn't what happened. So when you're writing, what did you ever consider having B end up playing Juliet, or did you always know that she would end up playing the role that she did?
I don't think I ever seriously thought about putting her as Juliet. It just never really seemed to fit her or her journey. Like when I'm thinking about the cast of Romeo and Juliet, the one that's like the most outgoing and the most like boisterous is I think Mercutio. And so to put her in that and then just kind of see how far she's come just seemed like it'd be so fun. And she does so well. So
Yeah, I agree. It also makes for a fun little scene for the readers of the book, I'm talking about. There's little I think to Romeo and Mercutio, which when I read that, laughed out loud. And I was also so like secondhand embarrassed, but it was a beautiful scene. Yeah. In this rehearsal process, the rehearsal process is mirroring these, growth as a character and her arc. You said that the story changed a lot, and there are a lot of versions of it. So as a writer, when did you know like what felt right for the characters and what felt right for all of their growths? Because even the ensemble characters have a lot of growth too. There's a lot of nuances and complexity. So how did you decide on like this is a good place and this is where I want to like end their story? This is where I want these characters to end up by the end of the book.
I knew at the end that I wanted her to have completed at least like most of the list on her own terms and then be maybe a little bit of a different version of herself, but still like herself at core. So her arc has been pretty consistent from the beginning. Her and Nick as well. I knew I wanted them to sort of resolve their rocky beginning. And then Nolan and Shelby were not always related. That was something I did later to kind of it had to take in Nolan to make Shelby more likable. So by combining them as siblings, I think that gave both of their arcs a little bit more depth. And Nolan, all my side characters, I think, were a little bit one-dimensional in the beginning, and it just took a few drafts to realize that they're like a big part of the story too, and that I wanted them to have like their own hopes and dreams and things that they wanted. I definitely in later versions talked a lot more about Mia's goal to be an actress and then sort of the difficulties of wanting to do something like that with like super academic parents. And I thought that was a pretty relatable concept as well. So yeah, no, when I first started writing, basically my only real experience was that I loved books. And so I didn't really have a lot of craft knowledge. So I think that my first versions were just like, what is she trying to say here? Who are these characters that like pop up and disappear? There was like a third best friend too. That was basically just the same lines that Nolan was saying. So I just got rid of her and gave all the lines to him. So yeah, it definitely evolved a little bit as I learned more about writing.
Yeah. I think it's reassuring though for, aspiring writers, new first time writers, to hear that, yeah, it's a process, it's a kind of trial and error, see like what works, what gets out, and what needs to be revised. So with that, what things did you learn writing this first book that has been really helpful for you and will be helpful as you write more books in the future?
Yeah, definitely plotting. I can like hyperfixate on things and then realize I wrote 4 chapters about a detail I didn't even care about. So having outlining everything and knowing exactly where I'm going before I start really helps me not have to rewrite a book 5 times. So that's definitely something that I'm doing. I read a bunch of different craft books that sort of helped me with like beats and timing and character arcs. And that has all been really helpful too with, just working on figuring out how to make my writing better. And reading other books in my genre has been really helpful, just seeing like all the other beautiful rom-com love stories out there, and just celebrating what other people are doing has been a lot of fun and helps me sort of find my rom-com voice again after the brutality of the pandemic.
A little diversion, but what rom-com books are you reading lately? What are you loving? Any book you want to shout out?
Sure. I finished Soulmates by Susan Lee not too long ago, and I went to see her launch in New York, and it's an absolutely beautiful, hilarious rom-com that just makes me want to go to California and eat burritos and see everything. A book that I absolutely love that is coming out in November, Never Ever Getting Back Together, another Swift title by Sophie Gonzalez. She's also at Wednesday, and really, really fun story, basically a like sapphic, not retelling, but sapphic story about these 2 girls who are going on this version of The Bachelor, and then their enemies go in because they both dated this guy and he cheated on both of them with each other, and then sparks fly. And the next on my TBR is Always the Almost by Edward Underhill, which is also coming out from Wednesday next year, and I'm so excited to read it. The cover is beautiful. I have it on my desk because it's next. But yeah, those are things I'm excited about.
Fun. I can't wait for the books that have yet to be released. So, looking to the future of YA books, the rom-com genre, contemporary YA, and looking at representation, what would you like to see more of in terms of anxiety or neurodivergent characters or just general representation about things that, we don't really see often in mainstream, very popular YA books?
Yeah, no, I would love to see more like mental health representation or divergent representation. There's a book coming out next year with Wednesday as well, called Tilly and Technicolor, which is Maisie Eddings' first YA book, and I am reading that, or I'm about to read that too, and it's all about a character with really bad ADHD and anxiety, and I mean, definitely what I was dealing with when I was a teenager. Just seeing that, and if I was a teen, being able to read something like that would have made a huge difference for me. So I'm really excited to see all these things that are coming out that have this great rep.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I will be sure to keep my eyes out for that book too. And yeah, while I could and would love to talk about your first book and just all of your experiences and projects forever, do have to wrap things up. But I want to say that you recently shared on social media some exciting book news. So, what can you tell us about that project? Can you tease anything, pique our interests?
Yeah, so it's called The Calculation of You and Me, and it comes out in spring 2024. And it is another neurodivergent sort of STEM math girl who's kind of like another coming of age story where she's trying to navigate her place in the world. She basically was dating this really golden, popular jock boy for like a year or two. And then he abruptly breaks up with her senior year of high school, like on the first day at school, and basically tells her that she's just not romantic enough or like not a good enough girlfriend. So she decides that she wants to learn all about romance. And it's basically a love letter to romance novels and booksellers. She goes through learning all of different tropes and like romantic like settings and dates, and her lab partner, this very surly goth boy, kind of helps her along the way. And then she realizes as she's learning more about love. Maybe she falls in love with herself a little bit more and realizes she doesn't need this first guy to begin with.
That feels like everything I would want in a rom-com book. So I can't wait. And do we have a release date for that yet? A year maybe?
It's spring 2024. That's all I know so far.
Okay, spring 2024. So a little ways away, but time flies. So yeah, just to wrap up, I want to say thank you so much for taking time to chat with me about Long Story Short. Truly, it's such a fun book, a great summer read, but also I think you could definitely read it any time of the year and love it just as much. So again, for all of our viewers and listeners, be sure to buy your copy of Long Story Short now, anywhere that you can buy books from, and also exciting news. Keep your eyes out for the calculation of you and me in spring 2024. Thanks again so much, Serena.
Yeah, thanks for inviting.